And then he joins the chorus denouncing crime in Washington, D.C., which is suddenly of concern to them. I had not heard them mention that before. Well, it turns out that Bakersfield, California, has one of the highest crime rates in America, recently described as one of the top 10 deadliest cities in America for its size, and its crime rate is higher than that of Washington, D.C. And yet, we're going to take this opportunity to kick around the people of Washington, D.C. Why? Because they're vulnerable, because they don't have voting representation in the House, and they have no voting representation or voice in the U.S. Senate. That's a scandal from the standpoint of democracy. But instead of trying to solve that problem, my colleagues instead want to use the people of Washington, D.C. as a whipping post, as a piñata, something to kick around. And I just think that that's outrageous, and it's wrong. You know, on January 6th, when we were attacked at the Capitol and in this chamber, there were hundreds of residents of Washington, D.C. who worked for the Capitol Police, who worked for the Metropolitan Police Department, who worked for other police forces, who came here to defend us. They came to defend the Congress that they are excluded from. You talk about patriotism, that's patriotism. And these people have a real grievance, a valid grievance, not an imaginary, fake, counterfeit grievance like a presidential election, which they still claim Donald Trump won, even though their arguments were rejected in more than 60 federal and state courts. And Trump lost that election by more than 7 million votes, 306 and 232 in the Electoral College. I'm glad you're nodding over on that side of the aisle, because these facts are indisputable. And yet still, they indulge the follies and the fantasies and the pathologies of Donald Trump. That's what they do instead. And they try to kick around the people of Washington, D.C., who defended us as patriots on that day.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pretty sure we haven't had a carjacking in my congressional district in several years. If someone thought about carjacking a vehicle in my district, probably wouldn't end well for them.
If you Google carjacking in Kentucky, what will come up is just a few months ago, 2 people were carjacked in different incidents at gunpoint in Louisville, which I think is in the state of Kentucky. And since we're talking about state laws, that's what should be relevant. So carjacking is obviously a problem across the country. The conceit of the other side seems to be that they care more about crime and public safety in Washington, D.C. than people who live in Washington, D.C. We just got lectures from 2 different members from New York about the terrible conditions in New York. Well, if that's what their concern is, then they should run for the New York State Legislature and change the laws that are involved if they can persuade their fellow citizens that they've got it right. If they can't, then maybe they should reconsider what their agenda is. But in any event, if you want to micromanage the laws of Washington, D.C. and rewrite this 275-page act that was passed to revise the criminal code, which they hadn't revised in a century, with the input of federal and local judges, prosecutors, public defenders, D.C. Council, then move to Washington, D.C. and run for the D.C. City Council.
Literally nothing gets by Jamie Raskin. Here he fact-checks in real time a Republican who tries to claim his state as some bastion of safety while criticizing Washington, D.C., only for Raskin to then immediately undermine that argument that his state isn't quite as saintly as he's making it out to be. This is happening because Republicans are seeking to overturn 2 bills passed by the D.C. City Council, which has the right to govern itself but is subject to having its legislation blocked by Congress. Now, the D.C. City Council is looking to overhaul D.C.'s criminal code for the first time in over 100 years, but Republicans are seeking to block the move, opting instead to micromanage the district and use crime as a pretense to do it. But it turns out that Republicans don't have anything close to a monopoly on safety and security in this country. According to a comprehensive study from Third Way, it turns out that per capita murder rates are, on average, 40% higher in the states that Trump won compared to those that Biden won. And yes, 8 of the top 10 worst murder rate per capita states voted for Trump in 2020. But we've all heard the talking point, it's actually the cities, and those are Democrat-run. As Jamie Raskin mentioned, Bakersfield, for example, is run at the local level by Republicans and is even represented in Congress by the Republican Speaker. And that city has a higher per capita murder rate than Los Angeles or San Francisco. Republican-led Tulsa, Oklahoma and Oklahoma City both have per capita murder rates that are triple and double, respectively, that of New York City. And just to build on that, it doesn't look like it's trending in the right direction in red states either. The state with the highest percent increase in per capita murder rate, Wyoming, with a 91.7% increase. The second highest state, South Dakota, with a 69% increase. In fact, 6 of the top 10 states with the highest percent increases in per capita murder rates are red states. And besides Wyoming and South Dakota, include Nebraska, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Kansas. Not exactly liberal bastions, are they? You know which states aren't even in the top 10? New York or California or Illinois, all of the right's favorite punching bags. It's almost like they need a refresher on their talking points. But what I find especially interesting is that while Republicans will fall over themselves pointing to crime, even despite the fact that they themselves oversee more dangerous states than Democrats do, when they have the opportunity to actually do something about it beyond just using it as a cudgel against blue states and blue districts, they block every solution. How many school shootings have we seen in this country that have been followed by Republicans offering thoughts and prayers? Followed by Republicans saying that now isn't the time to talk policy, it's a time to grieve. Followed by Republicans claiming that any effort to stop these shootings would just politicize the issue. And so what's happened? More shootings, more injuries, and more deaths. So forget about the fact that red states are more dangerous. Even when given the opportunity to solve these issues, still they refuse. If their misguided talking points weren't bad enough, it's their unwillingness to actually fix anything that really is the nail in the coffin here. And of course, underlying all of this is the battle for statehood in D.C. Republicans seem to be using crime as a pretense to strip the citizens of D.C. of their right to representation in Congress. But again, if high crime rates were cause to deny representation, then Kevin McCarthy himself wouldn't be in Congress, considering Bakersfield's crime rate. The fact is that we know why Republicans want to deny the roughly 700,000 D.C. residents statehood, and it is because they don't want anything to dilute their already outsized power in Congress, despite consistently getting fewer votes than Democrats. And so even though Wyoming has only 581,000 residents, apparently there's no issue with those folks getting representation in Congress, but the 672,000 residents in D.C., we couldn't possibly allow that. So the next time you hear Republicans congratulate themselves for being originalists, just remember, the founders included in the Constitution a mechanism for amending it, including one to add states, and we've continued to add states into the late 1950s. Add that to the founders' thoughts on taxation without representation, and it suddenly becomes clear that Republicans have very little interest in what the Constitution or the framers said, and are instead solely focused on retaining their grip on power by any means necessary. So good on Jamie Raskin for calling these Republicans out on their tired and outright false talking points that they use to justify their illiberal actions. At this point, Republicans would at least garner a shred more respect if they stopped pretending that the only reason they're against statehood for D.C. is because they know that they wouldn't win if the system was actually fair. But if Donald Trump showed us anything, it's that Republicans aren't worried about earning power, they just want to take it. Before you go, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more, please make sure to subscribe to my channel. You can click the thumbnail right here on this screen. And if you want to support my work even further, the best way is to subscribe to my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen. There you can check out my interviews with major players in the world of politics, including President Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren, Katie Porter, Jamie Raskin, and so many more. Plus other interviews that live exclusively on the podcast. That link is also right here on this screen, or just search No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen wherever you listen to podcasts.